Don't you hear my voice?
Yes.
Everything perfect. I can't believe it. Cool.
Marcelo Branco is among us. This is great. Hello, Salva. How are you?
Okay, thank you.
Thanks for coming and for accepting being the chair of this.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Well, I'd like to congratulate you and Giorgio for organizing this wonderful symposium and bringing together so many interesting people and papers. And I really, from the bottom of my heart, I wish we could be together in person, but this is the next best, and this is what we can do for now. So it is my pleasure to introduce the speakers of this session about music, healing, rituals, and trance, which is a topic that interests many of us and about which there has been some research, not enough, considering the important phenomenon that it is. And my friend Bernd Brabec de Mori is going to be the first speaker. I'm so happy to see you. And I wish I could see you in person again. But anyway, there we are. We have to live with this for a while. And I really hope that by the time we have our 2022 ICTM World Conference in Lisbon, it will be in person. And I hope all of you can be present here where I am. So a few words about Bernd without wasting too much time, because the most important thing is the paper, of course. He studied musicology in Salzburg and Graz and Vienna, and especially doing a lot of field work in Amazonia. This is his specialty on music and healing, as well as auditive anthropology. And he has cooperated with a number of institutions, the Phonogram Archive, as well as teaching at the University of Graz, systematic musicology, where again we met and we had a lovely coffee and visit, which I remember fondly. And so also taught at the University of Vienna as a visiting professor, and social anthropology at the University of Marburg. He has a number of publications that are extremely important: The Human and Non-Human in Lowland South American Indigenous Music, published by Routledge in 2013. He's also the co-editor of Sudamerica y sus Mundos Audibles, and also Auditive Wissenkulturen, published in 2018, and a number of scholarly articles. So he's a prominent researcher that many of us have learned from. So thank you, Bernd, for participating, and I look forward to your talk.
Oh, well, thank you very much, Salva, for this introduction. I feel a bit flattered, but well, thank you. I try to do my best to meet the high expectations that are now put on me. Okay, thanks also for Filippo and Giorgio very much for organizing and making it possible to meet here. I'm trying to talk about the construction of efficacy, which is meant the efficacy of musical treatments or musical sound healing. And it's about musical ritual spaces, times, and beings. Now, does it work? Does it work? Yes. So I'll give you a small overview of what I'm going to talk about in order to not surprise you, not surprise myself with the next slide. So first I'll try to give a brief introduction to ritual agency and ontology, which is kind of a difficult endeavor because it's very difficult to briefly introduce these concepts. I'll try my best. And then the field of research, which I call indigenous worlds. And then I'll give you two examples from those two indigenous worlds I've been working in. And I call them two indigenous worlds because the first one are, well, what we call indigenous people in the Western Amazon, the Shipibo, Conibo indigenous people in that case. And the second indigenous tribe I'm working with is Austrian music therapists and sound healers, which I actually treat in the same way as my ethnographic research associates. And so the worlds they construct, as the Shipibo healers construct or the Austrian therapists construct, are my indigenous world I try to understand. And then I give some conclusions. Maybe I hope it works, getting to a conclusion. And yes, I'm looking then forward to your questions and comments. Well, the brief introduction. What is ritual? Mainly, ritual is a historically very problematic term because it stems from the Latin and then from medieval liturgy. There was the Liber Ritualis as a Catholic book prescribing how to do things like marriages and baptisms and so on, and also exorcisms. So there's the Rituale Romanum, which is a famous book on that, on these kinds of rites. So when using the term ritual, we kind of have to be aware that we use something that is very Catholic and then has been attributed to others. And we have this kind of extension of othering, that ritual was ascribed to ancient civilizations. That's not us. We're not doing rituals, but in former times, or on other continents, other people, indigenous people, they are doing rituals. We don't. What we are doing here, an academic meeting, would be viewed from the outside as a ritual. But usually we talk about rituals when we talk about others. And also this kind of cultural and ethical distancing. Ritual is a term very much used for othering, actually. So that's a bit problematic. And there are famous ritual theories. We already heard about ritual theories in the morning. And so just mentioned here Van Gennep, Victor Turner, and Stanley Jayarajadambaya as some authors who were working on rituals. And as the introduction should be brief, just core concepts. Ritual is something we use as a form of analysis of some process. The process by itself is not a ritual. Usually people who are doing rituals, they do not say, I'm doing a ritual now, but the analyst says, this is a ritual, and I'm analyzing it by the means of ritual theories. And turn off cell phone. Yeah, okay, so a ritual, the ascription of a ritual usually takes place on events that are separated from everyday experience by what I call a bounded space-time. So there's a dedicated space for the process, and there's a dedicated span of time for the process. And what Turner and Van Gennep said, that we have this tripartite structure of a separation when participants leave their everyday roles, then go to liminality. That's the phase where things happen, where maybe everything can happen. People can transform, take on new roles, reverse authorities, and so on. And then we have reaggregation. That's a process when people go back to their everyday life situation. And usually there's an intention behind this event we call a ritual, which can be a transition or a passage, like a marriage or a baptism or something like that, or funeral, or maintenance of a certain state, like Independence Day, for example. The yearly celebration of Independence Day makes us maintain our independency. So this is also a ritual function of maintenance. And in medical sense, we could say, well, the transition from a bad state to a good state, or the maintenance of a good state of health, for example. Okay, what is agency? Even more complex. I mentioned also three authors, Oliver Gelbrun or Latour, we also heard about, and Robert Hatton, who is a music theorist writing about musical agency, very interesting things. I take agency not so much from Kokelman, but from Oliver Gell, and I view it as a cognitive necessity. So we live in a world which is interconnected by infinite means and infinite change of causality. And then we cannot grasp it cognitively, we cannot grasp infinitive causalities. So we break the chain of causality at some point and then attribute agency. As an easy example is, for example, when my car doesn't work in the morning, the car doesn't work because I forgot to maintain this and that, and because there is a cable corroded, and this is because blah, 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 blah. So we have an infinite chain of causality. However, I call my boss and say, I'm late because my car doesn't start. So I break the chain of causality and I attribute agency to the car. So it's the car. The car doesn't work. Okay. So the car is an agent that makes me come late to work. So although there are infinite causalities, I attribute agency to the car because I break the chain of causalities in order to be able to understand the process and to communicate it to my boss. I'm not going to talk to my boss about the whole story. Yeah? So that's what we do in real life all the time. And you see in this example, the car needs me for becoming an agent. So you need another actor who ascribes agency to something in order to become an actor, an agent. Yeah? And so this the result, the experience in our lived world is that we attribute agency to many things and beings and people and so on. But it's always an attribution that is made by an actor. For example, I also could, for example, you as my fellow human beings, I could say you behave in that way because you were taught at school or whatever. So, but I apply my theory of mind and I perceive myself as somebody who can decide for myself. And so I perceive you as fellow humans, as people who can decide for themselves. I make you actors in my lived world, And in other lived worlds, other people ascribe agency. But you always need an agent to ascribe agency to something else. And I mentioned here the literature, what Filippo mentioned very friendly just before, this sonic beings and sonic agency. I've been introducing with Victor Stoichita in 2012, Sonic Beings, the ontology of musical agency.
Bernard, sorry, Bernard. We are still looking at the overview slide. I think you are at the agency slide. Or am I wrong?
I am much further, yes.
Okay, we are still looking at the overview.
You still look at the overview?
Yes.
Ah, there it says that something broke. Well, I'll start again with it.
Sorry.
Whatever happened.
Share again the screen.
Yes, I do. Can you see ritual and agency?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay, I'll try to in the next slide. Agency.
Yes.
What are sound ontologies?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. I'm sorry, whatever happened.
No, sorry for interrupting.
Okay, now ontology is the mode of existence of things or beings in the world. So it's about the characteristics of the forms of existence of sonic entities. We would think that a sound is a sound. Yeah, it's bad that Benjamin Cohen is not here anymore. But that's he's the keynote speaker. He's a good friend of mine, don't mistake me, but he has the role of a keynote speaker to give the keynote and then leave. I think that's a social role, obligatory for keynote speakers. And because this would be interesting to discuss. The sound could be sonic waves, an impulse that we hear. However, we usually do not hear the vibrations in the air. We hear the sound, vroom, we hear a car. Yes, I hear a car, I say I hear a car. Or I hear a guitar, I hear a guitar. Although I'm listening to a sound, but I say that I'm hearing a guitar. If you're listening to me, hopefully right now when I'm talking, you're hearing Bernd, yeah. Although of course you're perceiving sound, but what we do all the time is to create beings from listening, and that's I also put the literature here by Victor and myself again about those postures of listening. Which means that the one who ascribes agency to sounds is the one who is the listener. Yeah? The listener usually ascribes agencies to sounds. And if the sound is an event caused by a car, I say it's a car, the car is sounding. If there's a bird song, I say it's a bird singing, I can hear a bird singing, and so on. So we create entities, we create sonic entities almost all the time. Okay, have to kind of catch up, not to talk too much about those theoretical concepts. As I mentioned, this indigenous worlds I'm talking about, I'm trying to understand by ethnography, which I define now just for the moment as a method to strive to understand the way of a certain group of people, the way a certain group of people lives the world. So actively constructs and lives a world. Yeah. So that's what Shipibo healers do, and that's what Austrian music therapists do. They live a world they live in. And this includes common ascriptions of agencies, like the things that I mentioned before, how we ascribe agency to things or beings. Also including common ontologies, like kind of we usually confirm that whatever that indigenous Amazonians would say spirits exist. We're working with the spirits. Austrian music therapists would say no, spirits do not exist, officially at least. Yeah. So things like that, which beings or things do exist in the world. And what's very important, to respect individual variation, because neither the Shipibo healers nor the Austrian music therapists are a kind of uniform group. They're not a block of similar people. They're very individual in dynamics. Okay, first part, field of research in the Western Amazon. You see a small map of the valley of the Ucayali River to the left. To the right, a nice photograph of big trees. And you can see it also behind me. This is from the Ucayali Valley. It's a rainforest, flat rainforest space. That's where people live. And when they dress up for festivities, they look like on the left side. But in everyday life, they wear t-shirts and so on. But this is kind of the festive dress. And on the right side, you see a healer in a nighttime ceremony. And I'm going to talk about the music produced by these kind of guys and not the festive music. There's a lot of other music in the Amazon around. I'm going to talk about this medical music now. This is this in a nutshell. It's a bit presumptuous to say that I'm going to talk about Shipibo healing songs in 1 minute. Yeah, but I published a lot of papers about this stuff. So if you're interested, yeah, just Google. So those trained healers, like the one on the photograph we saw before, they are specialists and they are trained, year-long training, and they sing during this kind of healing sessions. They sing songs to the patients and during nighttime in darkness. The song lyrics they perform, they describe in detail what they deal with the spirits and with other beings, or with the causes of the illness, or with healing spirits or whatever. They describe in detail what's happening. And their singing style, the application of the voice, the grain of voice, the timbre, defines more or less, that's in a nutshell, yeah, who they embody when they're singing. So two short examples. The first song in falsetto voice by a single singer, and the second a duo performance of two healers, building very different spaces of events, of sonic events. Yeah. And also the descriptions by Shipibo indigenous listening who would hear that would be very different entities they embody, they in-sound in their voice. You can't really talk about embodiment here, it's about in-soundment. They use their voice to in-sound entities. And these entities are then the sonic entities like spirits in that case that become present in the voices. So you have this ritual starting and in a certain space and with a certain succession of songs taking place, creating certain entities that are then effectively manipulating the patient. Okay, let's violently jump to Austria and talk about music therapy. Again, in a nutshell, again, presumptuously saying it's, talk about this in 1 minute. In German language, we have definitions of music therapy more or less in the sense that we separate between active music therapy, when patients or clients are playing by themselves or singing, making music. Then we have receptive or passive music therapy, where the patients listen to music. And we have what we call functional music therapy, that's kind of using sound for training certain movements in a very physical sense, like with a beat playing for helping people with a gait when learning again to walk after an apoplexia or something like that. And there's also something I call sound healing, which is done by unofficial freelance practices, including, for example, things like drumming and whatever. the point is that music therapists are certified, and anybody could do something like those music therapists are doing, as long as you don't say that you're doing music therapy. So music therapy is reserved for certified people, and everybody else who is using music for well-being is not doing music therapy. So, but for me, it's one group, for me as an ethnographer. So there are many kinds of ways of legitimization of what these people are doing exactly, and some of them are based more on this kind of evidence-based medical studies and or on psychoanalysis and integrative alternative medical concepts, up down to or up to very esoteric concepts. And usually those who study in university tend to stay at the left, and those who are autodidacts tend to do the thing on the right. And also those are mostly those who are practicing as freelance practitioners, and those people employed in clinical settings or officials as music therapists, they tend to use these ideas as explained here on the left side, evidence-based psychoanalytic universitarian concepts. However, you can have one of my main research associates does everything at the same time. Yeah, he studied music therapy. He's employed in the clinical concept, and in his free time, he's offering trance drumming courses with very esoteric concepts. So you can do both. You can move freely here. Yeah, so it's open. It's an open field. Yeah. And in this open field, usually talking about sound ontologies, sound is kept inside the music therapy or music treatment sessions, and it's used as a tool for achieving something, a tool for achieving signaling or expressing emotions or synchronizing, accessing states or accessing even repressed states or something. Social bonding, very important. I have here a German definition of music, which reunites the music is used for kind of substituting language, for bringing up emotions, interest, waking creativity, feelings of community and social bonding, and kind of activating movement and making you feel your physical body and so on. So music is a tool for achieving this. Yeah. So sound, vibration, and music are understood as means for communication, for interaction, for relation, and for accessing, for example, emotional states. Yeah, the tools for. Often there are no lyrics, improvisation is paramount, meaning beyond the session is marginal. Therapeutic music is a highly interesting category of Western music, because I think it's the only genre of music in the Western modern world which is never kind of recorded, sold, it's not produced, nobody listens to it. Yeah, so it's totally absurd to think about music therapy creating a result, kind of a work. That's not the case. So we have the session and it's achieved and that's it. So the music does not have any meaning beyond being played. Yeah, that's unique, I think, in the modern world. And what's very interesting is that the sonic agency are mostly not attributed overtly, but implicitly. I'll give you an example. And in informal practice, they are used more often than in formal music therapy sessions. So if you do an interview with music therapists, with a trained music therapist, she or he will probably say, oh, well, there is no specific sounds that have specific agencies or something. No, not really. It depends very much on the relations and whatever. So they are very reluctant usually to do this, to attribute kind of a being, whatever, in whatever form, to any sound or instruments. However, I play an example. While listening to those recordings, then you have people saying, all of them, almost all of them, say things like, when this bell started playing, when the bell starts, then this kind of opens my perception and it brings light into my perception. So you have a direct ascription of agency to the bell. Yeah, they wouldn't say it, but they do it. Yeah, so you have those ascriptions being performed all the time by both clients as well as therapists when listening to those moments and talking about those moments. So we have ascription of agency. And also there are some styles in receptive music therapy, like Wolfgang Strobel's trance therapy, where he has a concept from psychodynamic theory or something about archetypes based on Carl Gustav Jung, saying that, for example, the instrument I'm playing now as second, the monochord, would kind of cause people to become regressive and relive states of oceanic things and whatever. So there's a concept of agency behind that, that the instrument or the playing of the instrument causes a certain effect. So we also have this in certain schools. And the monochord in that case sounds like. And so on. So you're supposed to listen to that for about half an hour. And so this sound takes you somewhere. So you have also an implicit description of agency that the sound does something to you. But as I said, the discourse about those sonic agencies in music therapy is very limited. Music therapists usually are very reluctant to talk about this because they would not like to be put into the esoteric corner of the freelance people. Yeah. The freelance people, they usually talk much more freely about this kind of things. So to resume, to conclude, I'm sorry, but I think time is more or less okay. The indigenous Amazonians are quite explicit, yeah, with their spirits and so on. They're in soundments with a reference to sonic agencies, those spirits, while music therapists cannot afford in the political situation to attribute whatever the existence of spirits or those kind of beings in the sound. They do apply them, although preferably in unofficial discourse, if available, or in kind of in spontaneous talk about music and sounds, they do. Yeah. So it results in the end roughly comparing these two ontologies that in both fairly contrary concept of the Amazon and music therapists, how music and sound are used for enhancing well-being. The construction of this bounded space-time, dedicated space-time, we call it ritual. The construction of bounded space-time and the peopling of the same, the space-time, by filling it with sound and peopling it with sonic beings, this kind of sound entities that then become effective. They frame the narrative for the healer-patient interaction and thus for the construction of efficacy. With the difference that in the Amazon, efficacy is attributed to the spirits, while in the music therapy, usually efficacy is attributed to the relationality between therapist and patient. But however, the frame is this ritual space-time filled with sonic entities. So some questions that remain, there's questions about this appropriation and distancing, like can we use terms like magic? Yes, with indigenous people, yes, but with the music therapists, no. So it's a bit of a colonial problem of terminology still. Can insounded spirits be translated into modern applications of music therapy without being put into esoteric corners? Can non-scientific references in music therapy somehow be presented by practitioners without being labeled as esoteric? So we have problems of terminology here that are very important also for research being done in this context. So, well, sorry that I took 5 minutes too long. I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Bernd, for this fascinating talk. And now we have a few minutes for questions or comments. All right, I'm not sure who raised his or her hand first, but Michelle.
Hi, no, I was just clapping to say thank you so much. I didn't have a question, just thank you so much. That was fascinating. I really enjoyed it.
Okay, any questions or comments? Well, I have a quick one if no one else does. As we know, I mean, music therapy is practiced in many parts of the world. Of course, your case study is in one particular discipline, application in a particular country. So I wonder whether this same kind of attitude applies to music therapists elsewhere. Have you compared practices of music therapy in other settings?
Yes, I did superficially, based on literature and so on, and talking with practitioners kind of non-systematically. And you can distinguish styles or predominant schools of music therapies in different countries or regions. So the German-speaking region is a bit different from the Nordic countries, for example. In Norway and Sweden and Denmark, you have a little bit different discourse, much more based on community music therapy. Then in the British and US American discourse, you have more orientation towards this kind of evidence-based practices and studies and legitimations. And then there are countries like Brazil, for example, where you have a strong music therapy tradition, which is intends to integrate things like what you have in those countries like Umbanda, Candomblé techniques, although they are not, also reluctantly, it's not so easy to integrate these things, but there are things, people trying to do that. So probably more than, for example, in Austria. So there are differences in different regions, yes. And I'm referring here to, yes, what I can observe here with people in Austria.
So there are many indigenous groups of music therapists, I guess. Yes. Okay. Any other questions? We can entertain maybe one or two more.
Salva, they are also in the chat. Tamara raised her hand, also in the chat. Andre,
all right. Thank you.
And Livia also wanted to ask a question. And Tamara first.
Okay. Should I read them?
No, just say Tamara, Andre, and Livia.
Okay, so Tamara, please.
I was actually just clapping as well, but thank you very much, Bernd. Especially appreciated the connections with music therapy. I'm sure I'll come up with some questions when my coffee kicks in. Thank you.
Okay, and Andre?
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Bernd, for a beautiful presentation. My question would be, because you mentioned music therapy in the West, and as I see it, like techno parties, for example, they are also like self-administered mood regulations, and like some users or party goers, they call this as, this is like my therapy. But at the same time, when they talk about music therapy, the real music therapy, right? They would term it like this is esoteric or new age, and I still, not just with lay party goers, but even I think ethnomusicologists would say that everything or much of music therapy goes into like new age, as if new age was some monolithic, and we are aware that indigenous groups are not monolithic groups, but here is like, I think in academia is still this derogatory notion of new age as one group. I don't know. Do you have a comment on this?
Well, yeah, it's complicated. There is not a lot of ethnomusicological research in general about what you would term new age movements. I know some papers more from music sociology about whatever the hippie movements in Glastonbury and the pagan rituals in certain British Stonehenge and whatever, and the Nordic religious what do you call this? Religionswissenschaft, religious studies people. They are doing research on that, but more on the religion than on the music. So there's little research going on in that field. However, with music therapy, at least in Austria and in some of the Western European countries, they're really kind of legally legitimized. We have a law that's like psychotherapy law. You have those in university curricula. You can study this, and this you study for whatever 8 semesters or something. You can do your doctorate in music therapy. So you learn very specifically the theory and practice and methods and techniques that you use as a music therapist. And usually in this curricula, you learn to definitely distance yourself from anything esoteric and New Age. You will say, that's what I studied. I studied music therapy. I learned these and that techniques. That's what I'm applying. This is not voodoo or something. Yeah? So trying to build also a boundary, this very strong boundary work between the music therapists kind of against others who would practice New Age. Mm-hmm. So you have a very strong boundary there. So at least here in Austria and in those countries, the closer countries that I know, music therapists are very much concerned with not being esoterics. So, and you have clinical settings in almost any bigger hospital in Austria, you have music therapy. So it's growing and it's becoming more and more accepted as a medical therapeutic practice, which is not New Age. So this is changing very much in the last years.
Okay, thank you. And the last question from Livia.
Yes, thank you, Bernd. I really enjoyed this presentation. I think that Philippe also wants to make a question afterwards, if there's still some time.
I'm sorry.
So, first, I think that your discussion on agency was really interesting, but I just want to make sure that I got it right. When you say that the listeners ascribe agency to sounds, so if we go to this emic-epic distinction, would you put agency on the emic level? So it's the agency is something that participants are constructing, but at the ethic level, you don't analyze music as an agent. You know what I mean? So this is the question. I don't know if this is what you meant or it's something different. And yeah, so shall I continue, or if you want to answer?
Yes, I try to answer in one sentence. Yes, this is how I try. I try to analyze that in order to understand what agencies are ascribed to the indigenous singers by indigenous or kind of these actual listeners or clients, and how they form the discourse among themselves, and not, I refrain from saying that this and that music works in this and that way. I don't know anything about that. Yeah? I'm just trying to understand what they attribute to the sounds.
Okay, thank you. Interesting.
Our last, I'm sorry, go ahead, Livia.
Yes, very briefly. When you were talking about examples from Austrian music therapy, one example was music as a means for accessing repressed memories. So could you elaborate a bit more on this? I find it very interesting. There's a literature in dance studies that analyze contemporary couple dances of African descent, such as salsa, kizomba, and so on, as a way to recover memories of the Black Atlantic, putting it in the Black Atlantic theoretical framework of slavery, of the times of slavery. So I don't know if it can be connected with this idea. Could you please explain a bit more of what kind of access to repressed memories you were talking about? Thank you.
I think that would go too far. Should we stop here? Maybe can we talk later? Or try in one sentence? This is possible, of course. I mean, we heard before that we have those autobiographical memories, and of course we can use music or as a dance to kind of trigger or relive certain memories, and we can also relive certain narratives that we learned, for example, family narratives. So many people, for example, in Austria, Germany, still fight with Nazi problems, yes, as victims or as descendants of those culpable people, murderers and so on. So we have to kind of deal with that, and this still lives on in my generation. So, so you have, yes, you have stories, narratives that span generations that can be accessed with certain musical means.
Thank you.
Hey, Filippo, now the last question.
Thank you. Very fast. The question is: Do we need this cognitive function called ascription of agency in order to heal with music? I mean, is ascription of agency a necessary condition for music having and a healing power?
I think yes.
Yeah, we should try to demonstrate that if
yes,
in the future. Okay, thanks.
So maybe in the discussion at the end, we can come back to this important question. Thank you so much, Bernd. And now we move to our next speaker, Tamara Turner. Tamara is an ethnomusicologist and cultural anthropologist. She is working at the intersection of psychological anthropology, musical and performance practice, and affect studies. She specializes in North African Sufism, anthropology of religion and medicine, and the links between cultural notions of affect, consciousness, and mental emotional health, particularly in Algeria and Morocco. And her doctoral thesis won an Elsevier Outstanding Thesis Prize. So thank you, Tamara, for joining us, and we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much, Salwa, much appreciated. Okay, I will attempt to do the screen sharing. And let's see if it's going to let me choose which screen. Okay. Second. Okay, 1 second here. Now what is going on? Share screen. Is anything happening? No, okay, let me try. I think maybe what's happening is that I have another monitor hooked up. So this could be the problem. Let me try sharing it here.
Yes, yes, no, yes.
Okay, you're not seeing it fully expanded, right?
No.
Okay. So let's see if I can, these buttons are so, oh, there we go. Okay, now do you see the full slide?
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, great. I just didn't want to have you looking at all the little things coming up ahead of time. It's a bit distracting. Okay, so thanks so much to Filippo and Giorgio for your invitation. I'm really pleased to be here. I want to first give an overview of the ritual that I've been working with, this particular community in Algeria I've been working with. I'll talk a bit there about how they conceive of music, and then I'll use that as a lead into talking about what we mean when we talk about music and healing, and what does actual health mean, what does healing mean. So the idea behind my title is because this particular community do not use the word healing or words that would imply that there's some sort of closure or arrival point. It's an ongoing sort of maintenance practice. And there are lots of different kinds of trance going on that require different kinds of maintenance. So the community I work with is called the Algerian Diwan of Sidi Belal. I know that it was Leila and David that are going to be speaking about Moroccan Gnawa tomorrow morning. So this is a sister tradition of the Gnawa. This is a group of the Afro-Maghrebi tradition in Algeria as opposed to Morocco. This is a kind of a photograph of a ritual. You can sort of see the gimbri there, the instrument that the gentleman looking right at the camera is playing. So like Gnawa and Tunisian Stambeli, Diwan evolved out of the trans-Saharan slave trade. There's quite a number of ethno-linguistic groups that comprise Diwan. Hausa, Sorai, and Bambara tend to be the top three. But this map shows the complexity of trade that was not only north-south, but also east-west, meaning that a lot of these ethno-linguistic groups are mixed, their ideas are mixed. So it's difficult to really attribute sort of a pure origin to any of these particular practices. Although the Hausa Maguzawa group, they tend to be very, very strong in Western Algeria. So anyway, it's a mixture of different ethno-linguistic groups. When they arrived in North Africa, then they also had these special houses called diyar that would be a place they could go to be with families and their ethno-linguistic group. In various places in Algeria, then these communities were segregated. And this is a picture of what they call the Gourbi or the Village Nègre. And so these would be sort of shanty towns or areas where different ethno-linguistic groups, Black communities, were on the outskirts of town. And this is a picture from Saïda, which is a small town about 3 hours south of the Mediterranean, south of Oran, in Western Algeria. So because of this exchange and this trans-Saharan travel and communication, we have a lot of exchange of lutes. Lutes are widespread all across West Africa in particular. These are some photos of the influences that formed the lutes in North Africa. So we have the Fulani Hodu in the top left, the Hausa Molo in the bottom, and then the Bambara group of various Ngonis. So here's Eric Cherry's map showing dispersal and popularity of lutes across the head of Africa. So it's quite there's a lot of resonance. So in these instrumental exchanges and the kinds of tonalities and musical qualities we're talking about, there's a lot of this trans-Saharan connection. So North African lutes today are descendants of these lutes. This particular kind of lute that you're seeing here, this more boxy, square, larger lute, really originated in North Africa, inspired or descended from these smaller lutes. On the left, we have the Moroccan Gnawa, various 3 different kinds of Moroccan Gnawa, Gnaber, which is the plural. In the middle, we have Tunisian stambeli. The bottom photo is a little hard to see, but it's a round kind of barrel-like drum that then becomes what they call the gumbri. And then on the right-hand side, we have Algerian gimbri, which is more of a square box rather than this sort of long oval-like shape with the Gnawa. And so the sound is different. The tunings are slightly different. The strings, the techniques are slightly different. But overall, there's a lot of similarity. So like the Gnawa and Stambeli and D1, then over centuries became part of popular Islam or Sufi practices, especially adapting vocabulary, practices and epistemologies from various Sufi orders that were already really active in the area, various other healing traditions. So although what makes them special is that they have origins in sub-Saharan Africa, what makes them also very North African is this emergence and this constitutional Sufi kind of epistemology that's building their ritual practice and the way they look at trance and healing. So that's to say that there's a lot of really parallel and analogous practices in other orders in North Africa. So the Qadariya, the Alawiya, the Aisawa, which some of you may know about, there's a lot of similarity there. These 2 photos just show this kind of Sufi attachment. So for those of you who don't read Arabic, it's Zawiya Sidi Bilal Jamia Ahl Gnawa, which is a ritual space for Sidi Bilal, Bilal being sort of the spiritual father of this group. And basically by calling it a Zawiya, they are attaching themselves also to other Sufi practices. And they need to do this because frankly, there's still a lot of racism in North Africa, and being one of the only Black Sufi groups in the region, there's a lot of self-reflection and understandably paranoia and wanting to attach themselves to legitimate trance and healing practices. A lot of sometimes I hear my interlocutors refer to them as like voodoo, a derogatory way of saying that what they're doing is more like black magic than Sufism. So here's another photo depicting how they've attached themselves to other Sufi practices in North Africa. On the left, we have the Kuba or the tomb of Sidi Musa in a town called Crystal, north of Oran. And on the right-hand side, we have people marching or proceeding with flags. I just realized maybe this will be, yeah, that's probably a better view for you all in terms of seeing. Just a quick note about my methodology and how I was embroiled in this, especially issues of gender and so forth. So I'm a musician as well as an anthropologist. So I was speaking with people, sitting in, having lots of discussions, both with men and women. But an important part of my research was also playing and learning, and especially when I had difficulty drawing out people to talk about practice. People don't like to talk about especially trance and suffering that much, but playing and engaging with them in embodied research was a nice way to connect and learn a lot about things that can't be spoken. So this involved in various kinds of intimate settings, but in the bottom left-hand corner, I performed in a festival. And so this also kind of was my attempt to try to really engage in the various ways that this particular music is portrayed and performed in Algeria. So a bit now about the ritual dynamics of Diwan. I love this photo. The man on the right is a muqaddam, which is a sort of a ritual leader or a ritual specialist. And he's directing the ritual. So this is a space, you have all these spectators, and the man in the black robe is beginning to go into a state of trance. But this is highly organized and very much refereed. So the muqaddam, he is really in charge of what is unfolding. He will stop people, he will ask people to come up, tell them to move over, tell the musicians to stop and start. So this is not some kind of just spontaneous, sometimes we have these impressions of things being spontaneous or improvised, but there is improvisation, but this is also highly organized and refereed. These blocks represent just song groups, so it's not important that you can read the words here. It's just to give an idea that there's a predictable, robust corpus of songs that are, so in other words, they're always in the same order. Sometimes they may skip a song or if they're running out of time, but these songs also are associated with spirit pantheons, with prophets, with saints. So we have both human and beyond human personages here. Sometimes they're mixed. So it's very, very common that you would have a saint and a jinn or a spirit with the same name. So for example, Sidi Musa, which would be Moses, the prophet. There's also a whole order of spirits that are water spirits. So this connection between water, between Musa and the spirits, they will end up being under the same family group here, so called Bahariya, or of the ocean, of the water. So this is an interesting way, since one of the questions that Giorgio and Filippo were asking us to engage with was about any kind of symbolism. So in this way, we have certain kinds of ways of moving between human and non-human personages or agencies, and it makes it quite flexible for trancers to move between different ontologies. Again, it's not important that you be able to read the text. This is just to show these boxes are the lists of different kinds of ritual actions that have to happen in the songs. This was part of my my book manuscript in process and my PhD. So on the left, we have the song. On the far right, we have the description of all the things that are supposed to happen in that particular song. So for example, in songs for the Prophet Muhammad, there would be depictions of his lifetime. Here we have a depiction of the Saint Abdul Qadir Jilani, so an older man he has beads and a staff and a candle, and he's supposed to move his body in gentle, careful ways like a saint would. This is for Budrabella. This is a sheepskin. And so Budrabella is depicting sort of mendicant Sufis who don't have money, so they dress in sheepskin. So there's lots of stories, as well as stories of humans and non-humans being evoked through those different song suites. So moving on a little bit to the sound world, and what are we talking about in terms of the structure of the sound, the quality of the sound. In this photo, we have a little bit better view of the gimbri on the right-hand side, and then the karakeb, which some of you may see that are a little bit difficult to pick out in this photo, but there are these metal castanets that accompany the gimbri. And then we have call and response singing. I will show some videos at the end. Hopefully the connection will be fast enough to show you videos of these different trance states, and you can hear the music. One of the most important things to say about the music, to keep it brief, is that it's very palpably cyclical. So there's this sense of repeated themes and layers of instruments coming in and joining other instruments. Things typically have a trajectory of speeding up and intensifying, but this way of themes developing and repeating, and then this kind of compression has a certain shaping of the experience. So in other words, it's not a theme that's then developed and then there's no end. So there is a beginning of a particular melody that introduces this song, and then this develops with chorus, with these different castanet instruments coming in. So it's a very sonically rich and thick texture that has, for me, I felt very much like it was a spiral. I felt myself like time was actually vertical and spiraling up as opposed to being something linear. This is taken from Rainer Pollock's article. Some of you may know Rhythmic Feel as Meter, which I find very helpful. He was describing djembe drumming and this sort of non-isochronous beat organization that is happening in djembe playing. And this is also happening in North African music, and between Gnawa, Diwan, and Stambele have this phenomenon of where beats are not divided evenly, and you have this kind of lilting offset feel. Oh yes, I wanted to actually have this before. So then Rich Jankowski also talks about similar phenomenon of compression, of this kind of rhythmic compression of things building. So Stephen Friedson, for example, has made some arguments about, is this actually shaping trance experience, this kind of musical structuring? I would say both yes and no. I don't think it's there's no direct causality, but it is having an impact on how trancers are moving their bodies. The musicians, their job is to really watch what's happening, and it becomes a conversation of when to intensify, when to develop, when to speed up, so on and so forth. This, for my fellow music nerds, is just a way of thinking about, again, this sort of flexibility of how we feel ourselves inside a song with this shifting gestalt. Again, Friedson and others have argued that this might be something to do with why people go into trance. I don't necessarily agree with that, but I think it's a fascinating phenomenon when you're sitting there watching how people are responding differently to these feels. If I'll just play just to kind of also test how the sound is working, see if I can play a bit from this is an introduction at Istikbar from a Gnawa song. Can you hear that? Just give me a thumbs up. Yeah. Okay. Okay, good. So you may have heard a bit of both this 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 3 as well as so there are two different ways of feeling this rhythm, and musicians do talk about these two different feels. In fact, they even call it different rhythms. So that's just a little detail about some of the sonic world that we're inhabiting. So what does music have to do with health in this particular situation? Some of these ideas are very basic, just kind of, again, reminders that even what music is really varies across the world. So the word music did not emerge in this Diwan context until around the 50s. It was never thought of as a separate thing from the Diwan, from the ritual. So this idea of Diwan music really came out of more the sort of like things growing in the 60s and 70s and festivals popping up. So that alone is important. It hadn't before then been separated from the body and from the moving body. Then we also have notions of the senses. I draw from affect quite a lot because of the way that Algerians talk about affect and really prioritize it. Ihsas is the word they're using, or feeling, which translates quite well with English, probably better than affect. I really use affect for my English audience to distinguish between how we're thinking about emotion, but that's kind of a detour I can talk about later. So again, in this part of the world, there's also ideas about the sonic agency that Bernd was talking about. So we have, for example, ruqiyya, which is a form where sound, where somebody is chanting passages of the Quran or healing passages over a body, and that actual sound vibration does the healing. So it's not important that the person receiving this understand what's being said. It's not even important that they know it's happening. In fact, I spoke to a Roki who is doing this in Algeria, and he said he does it sometimes when there's somebody sitting next to him who's stressed out, and he'll in his mind be sending them these passages from the Quran, and this kind of sonic, energetic healing is being passed on to them. So this is already an idea that's quite common in the region. It's nothing necessarily specific to D1. Also, in terms of the importance of sound in this region, the recitation of the Quran is very important. So we know Hirschkin's work, or some of us may know Hirschkin's work, also talking about the importance of hearing. So I think it's safe to say that in this community, in particular in Algeria, there's a importance placed on the hearing and senses, so that more than the vision, for example. To slowly ease into trance now. Again, there's this idea too of equilibrium more than how sometimes the healing gets pushed more into sort of a linear process, or something where we're arriving somewhere. So then in these trance experiences too, I'm going to come to another slide in a second to explain all these different taxonomies. It's important to keep in mind that this is not ecstasy. So this is not the kind of trance we're talking about, rapture like tarab. It has some of the levels may have some analogous bodily sensorial experiences to tarab, but mostly this has to do with painful feelings. And these are two quotes that I really like to keep in mind, and in terms of remembering that we're not necessarily talking about the mind or brain when we talk about mental emotional health. It's a tricky way of phrasing it, but here in Algeria, it really is, it's not so much about the mind when they're talking about trance. In fact, the mind is seen as being something that blocks consciousness more than opens it up. And then also Lambec's quote about, even though we can recognize biological layers, there's a whole lot more going on there. So these are two quotes that I try to remember when talking about trance. There's a lot of different ways trance has been theorized in scholarship. So I mentioned that mental emotional health here, and in terms of the self and the mind, that's an important part of this. So the most important thing I could outline is this idea of porosity of the self and community in terms of what's being enacted in these rituals. So feelings move between people. When I'm asking, does the self have emotion? Are they external, or both? Feelings, especially, they talk about grief moving between people. So one of my interlocutors mentioned turning up to a ritual and not understanding why he was sad. That he picked up sadness from someone else. So in this way, these are emotions, but they function like affects. So I already mentioned, moving on to that second paragraph, ihsas. So feelings is the word I'm working with in the community. And one other important concept here when talking about porosity and the space that we're in is this idea of atmosphere. They're using a term called hal, which comes up in other Sufi groups, but here hal has more of a quotidian meaning. It's a kind of energy in the air that makes trance possible. So anytime I'm speaking with my participants or interlocutors about ritual, hal is referenced as the thing that makes it possible. This is a community feeling. So again, this is something that musicians are creating through their playing, but also with the ritual elders, with the public there. It's a community feeling of atmosphere that makes trance possible. And this again comes back to affects and the way that the individual physical self and the community and the psychological are all embroiled and inextricable. One quick note about the body here. Bernd gestured at this also, but in terms of working the body, this is a really important part of trance here. They use the word yakhdam, which means to work. So the musicians are supposed to work the trancers through their body. And this is where consciousness, different kinds of consciousness is coming from, is through the body being worked. Again, happening sonically. So this experience of the sonic experience of being worked through music, expressed through the body, and then having your community surrounding you. Okay, now these are all various terms for trance. So it's a huge spectrum. And then I'm going to get into the video so you get to see these. On the top left corner, we have sort of these vague categories of trance. So sort of nouns, jedba, hal, and buri. And jedba, some of you may know about, it's a very common term throughout different Sufi groups, Sufi Torok. Here, it's translated loosely as a kind of emotional trance. It's the one that's closest to tarab, if for those of you who know tarab. I learned how to do this, jedba. You can do it with your body. It's a kind of going with your feelings and sort of letting go. But consciously, you're basically there. And if you had to stop yourself, you could. How is the next state up? And it actually means state or conditions. It's somewhere between this jedba and buri, the more intense state of trance. And in this particular category, one can start to lose control and not be able to stop themselves and may require help from the outside. And then buri is closer to dissociation. Although there are many, many cases where you see people come in and out, they are still trying to control themselves, and then you sort of see them, see their consciousness disappear for a second and something else comes in. I don't call it possession. I don't like the word. I think it has a lot of colonial and pathologizing connotations, but buri is the word they use there, or maskun, which means to be inhabited in Arabic. Then on the bottom left, we have these various registers of feeling. So this is also why I'm talking about affect and feeling here. All of these sort of registers of trance are talking about how trance feels or how it feels to be in it, the kinds of movement that are going on. You can be sick, you can be inhabited, seized, taken away, inwinded, miryoh. And then we have many, many verbs used for how trance should be in the body. To go absent, to travel, to be mounted, or to mount something yourself. Yatahawul, which is a nice one, which is a kind of turning and thrashing. So these are all ways that my interlocutors talk about trance. And I should emphasize that this is a spectrum. So even sitting with people after years and looking at different trance states and talking about, what's going on here, people move between these states. So somebody could start in jedba and end up in bori. They could start in bori and then work out through the body what's happening and then end up in jedba. So it's a spectrum, a very dynamic spectrum. A quick note on how my interlocutors are describing this. I mentioned most of these modalities of trance are brought about by suffering. A word that they use is rabina. And in some ways, these are ways of talking about, I don't feel well. Mahasij mleh is a very common phrase, I don't feel well. So this kind of different kinds of suffering. And then another common phrase, I can't control myself. Mahakim shfirahi is about not being able to control oneself in trance. Feelings I mentioned being picked up from others, that has something to do with controlling. So this is one has to go absent or kind of dissociate in order to not only allow things to come through the body, but musicians say this in order to work the music for the musicians. So in this way, the body is leading. There's a sense of the mind going away, or yirib, and then the body takes over. And lastly, so when I hear the melody, that's it, I'm gone. And there's this feeling of the community then has to really help this person come to the ritual space, get up and trance. Okay, so I want to show, I think it's 4 videos of just portions of this to give you an idea of what this looks like. A video is worth thousands of words. So this first one is jedba. And there's an 80-year-old man up front. You can see how he's directing his own trance state in particular. And he actually even stops the musicians at the end. When the bukhor, or the incense, is brought to him, this smoke that you'll see, this is where he sort of tips over into this state that's a bit more intense. But he is able to stop himself. So again, this is this first category called jedba. And I hope, give me thumbs up or thumbs down as I'm playing this. I'm not sure what you can see. Or how well it's going to work. So there he stopped the musicians and finished and decided, okay, that's it, I'm done. The musicians do not stop the trancers. The muqaddam, the leader, may decide, but otherwise the musicians are there until they're basically told to stop. In this next video, this is slightly moving up from Jedba into Hal. I want you to keep your eye on the young man in the red. He's got two muqaddams around him, helping him, patting him on the back. Another one that comes to tie up his robe so that it's out of his way. And he's sobbing and crying into his father's shoulder. There's other kinds of trance happening around as well, but there's a few moments where he's tipping on this verge between Jedba and Hal. So I'll just play sections of this before moving on to the next one. What I like there too is you can see that man on the right who's really directing the musicians. I hope that was clear. I know the video is not the best quality, but he's very adamantly directing them and keeping them energized. This is part of that Hal, that atmosphere that's really important to keeping the energy up so that trance can happen. A quick one here about Hal, which goes more into Bori. There's a moment in this video where a gentleman is starting to lose control of himself and his friends come over to try to help him. They even have to kind of physically move his body into another place because he's dissociating. So I'm going to try to skip to the right moment there. I know I'm running a bit over, so I'm kind of speeding this through, but I think it's nice to see these. So throughout that process, he's needing some physical help to not collapse and to try to keep the trance process going. And lastly, this next one is just a glimpse of Bori, this most intense trance state where there's the idea of inhabitation of non-human agencies coming in. And this man, you'll see him eating red coals, which is one of the signs that this is how we know this is what's happening here. So if you look carefully, you'll see something glowing in his hand. Also, there's something odd going on because normally people should not have their shirts off. So the fact that he's ripped off his shirt and is dancing with hot coals suggests that some sort of spirit or jinn or something that's not quite pleasant has kind of come in and crashed the party. In fact, this was the discussion about afterwards with my interlocutors about this isn't really supposed to happen in this song. This is a song for Budrubela. And anyway, it's supposed to be more kind of gentle trance happening. So this is kind of when things don't go right. All right, I'm going to skip the next one and maybe in the discussion can show that later. I had some photos to show of just different developments of trance states, but I'm well aware I've gone over my time. So thank you very much. And I look forward to your thoughts and questions.
Thanks so much, Tamara, for this really wonderful, wonderful presentation and so rich, so many questions. Of course, I would like to ask if this is part of the Tsar complex, you know, because I've seen Tsar in a number of places like Egypt and Oman, and so much in common, you know, what you describe is very similar. So I wonder what the Sufi connection is, you know.
Yeah, thank you. There is a lot of similarity with Tsar there. A lot of the same caravan passages crossing the Sahara Desert, some that went up more directly through Morocco into Tlemcen and Oran, others kind of more of a central route, and then others with more easterly route going up through Tunisia onto Egypt. Yes, there's a lot of connections here, both in ritual practice. So again, this Sufi connection is really because of the several centuries over the time that Diwan was developing from sub-Saharan African populations in North Africa. They were taking in other healing practices. So over a long period of time, also in part to sort of legitimize themselves, they were adapting to other kinds of Sufi practices. They have the most resonance with the Qadariya and the Tijaniya. So you'll actually see adepts moving between these three turuq. Diwan adepts will sometimes go visit the Qadariya and vice versa. They'll share rituals together, sometimes back to back, meaning, well, yeah, so one will hold a ritual, then the other ones will. So it is an atmosphere, this kind of, I think Julia Clancy-Smith defined it as the Baraka belt, this sort of ideas of that are very much a part of the landscape and the feeling there about baraka and all sorts of that moving the body and music is already something that's being practiced by the Qadriya, the Tijani, and many other groups. So in that way, they're calling themselves Diwan Sidi Bilal, and of course Bilal was not a saint, he wasn't a sheikh, he didn't have a silsila, this chain of Sufi learning, but they're adopting this and using this language and this kind of epistemology. And right, so they Algerians sometimes call this Islam populaire, popular Islam, but just as well as Aisawa and the Hamecha in Morocco, there's a lot of this overlap between what the origins are in sub-Saharan Africa and the North African Sufi practices.
Thank you so much. I took my advantage as a chair, but of course the floor is open for questions. And I must remind myself to look at the chat. But any questions? Well, I think that all of us were overwhelmed by your presentation and by the wonderful videos, and just want to see and hear more. But if there are no questions for the moment,
we have one from Bernard.
Bernard, okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Although I get the impression that I'm talking too much here, I would really like to connect what you were saying at this moment about the connections to sub-Saharan Africa, because you mentioned the legitimation strategies. And I have to admit, I did it myself when in the discussion, I think I said, yeah, there are people saying that this is voodoo, saying that voodoo is something like witchcraft, it's something like false stuff and so on, which actually I've been working with voodooists in the Caribbean, so I know that it's not the case. And what you showed, especially the last example of this possession with the glowing coals, and this is voodoo, actually it is, yeah, the same thing that they are doing. So there's question one, this kind of legitimation, you hinted at it, but how do people deal with this in the Sufi context and like the reference to sub-Saharan Africa? And my second question would be also connected to what Salva said about Tsar. And as far as I knew about Sarah in Sudan and also in Iran, that the trances are often women, and I didn't see any women here. So what about the gender roles? What about yourself being a performer? I only saw men in your videos. What about the gender situation, please?
I know we've gone quite over time. I apologize for that. So let me just say two short things, and then if we like to just move on, and then I can connect with people later or in the discussion later. Very briefly, with regard to the second question first, because of modesty codes, a lot of women don't want to be filmed. So that's the main reason. Men trance just as much as women. But there were a lot of women who said, I don't want to be in your videos. So they knew I was videoing, of course. Only a couple actually wanted to be filmed, but that's the main reason for that. I'd be really happy to talk to you more about kind of my position in that, because it could be quite awkward, but it was very interesting being a woman moving between these two worlds. Yes, and thanks for the point about the voodoo. Yeah, it's again, very briefly, it's a controversy. People who are outsiders of D1, they do judge them. It is a minority marginalized community, especially there's a lot of racism still in Algeria. So it is this constant battle between, well, this isn't religion, this is therapy. And they see themselves as Muslims, they see themselves as practicing Muslims, they stop the ritual for call to prayer. But there's this tension definitely between what's legitimate and what's not. It's definitely ongoing, and there's no real simple way to sum that up. But thanks for your question. Yeah, let's talk some more.
Thank you. Livia has a question. Livia, please.
Yes, thank you very much, Tamara, for this fascinating presentation and for sharing these wonderful materials with us. And I have a pair of questions for you. The first one is methodological. I wonder how did you get access to the field? Because as I have seen, it's a male space in general. Some of the videos were not in public spaces, so I guess it was not easy to gain access to the field. You're a performer, but I don't know if women usually perform in this context. I only could see men in these videos, so if you could tell us a bit about it, that would be great. And the second question, you were talking about the Sufi connection, and I was wondering if you think that there's also some kind of transatlantic connection, the Yoruba connection. Do you think we could speak about it? And thinking, for example, of Brazilian candomblé. This kind of about it, I would love to hear it. Thank you.
Thanks, Livia. Yeah, the access was an interesting process. I had previously worked on the Gnawa and knew some people, and I was at that point in Boston, Massachusetts. Was studying a Moroccan band there, and the drummer was Algerian, and he said, well, I know you're interested in the Gnawas, and we have this too. I'll set you up with musicians if you like. One thing led to another. I had musicians meeting me at the airport, and then I had to be really introduced, and that means taken and chaperoned to these rituals in the beginning. They are not open to any Algerian as well. I mean, it really is kind of a closed situation, but with time, being introduced by others, I was able to start attending the rituals and eventually could go on my own. But yeah, I needed to be chaperoned in the beginning. Women do not play this music. They have other kinds of roles. So that was kind of an interesting and odd, sometimes awkward methodological approach. I managed to get people to teach me Gimbri, to learn how to play and kind of try to understand the musical side of it. One wasn't particularly comfortable with that and stopped that after a couple of lessons, and then one continued with me. So I have to say, that's where white privilege came in as a white woman in Algeria. This is not something that an Algerian woman could have done. I was in a lot of male spaces because the men were the musicians. I would say they didn't really take me seriously as a musician, but that was okay. I didn't mind. I was just happy to have to learn. And then I was able to be in the women's spaces as well. So I could move to some degree between both. Yeah, so women play other kinds of music in Algeria, but not D1. And then the transatlantic question, yes, there's a lot of analogies with candomblé and maracatu. A lot of the same populations that were taken north across the Sahara in the trans-Saharan slave trade were also taken in the transatlantic slave trade. So that's why we actually, I mean, at a musical level, some of you who may know candomblé or maracatu may recognize, and even in samba, the with the tambarim in samba. So these kinds of lilts and musical components, there's a lot of overlap. In fact, there's been some samba bands jamming with Gnawa musicians recently. Spirit pantheons, to some degree, there's that as well. It's quite complex. Yoruba is not so much happening in Diwan, but you had other ethno-linguistic groups that were in both slave trades, unfortunately. So yes, I hope that helps to touch on that, and I'm happy to chat with you more later about in more depth.
Thank you. One last question from Sophie, and then we have to move to our final paper. Thank you.
Hello, Tamara. I wanted to hear about you about the way people speak about the non-trance performance, about the people who are moving or dancing. I don't know if they speak about dance, or people who are sitting around the musician.
Thank you. That's a great question. I never get that question, or I rarely get it. So thank you. They're very important. This is part of the community and the public that are, I mean, this is all about witness. So there's a reason why these trance processes really need to happen in public. They rarely happen just at home, for example. It really is a public space with this atmosphere. So all of those people coming, a lot of them have grown up in the tradition. They like to watch. They enjoy the music also just as part of a music that aesthetically they enjoy. They also have roles in helping out and serving tea, helping people move on and off the trance space if they pass out. So there's a lot of that public support role that is important to the trancers. You may have seen in some of the videos, some of them have official roles to go help out by tying back clothing, by putting robes on people. But then it is important just to have a public, because you really feel sort of the energy, they'll say howwood, which is like to come down when everybody starts going home and leaving, and there's no energy there anymore. So it's really important to have that public there who are just watching and supporting. So that's a really great question, really important. It doesn't, I should have emphasized that more, because that is key to how all of this happens.
Just I wanted to say, I asked this question because all your presentation is remembering what I was explaining this morning about my PhD, but there is no trance in my PhD. It's very European traditional dance, but all the rhythmic or musical things you are presenting, I can find it in the Azores. It's really not exotic. There is no trance, and I'm doing my PhD, and I'm still dealing to how I can explain things that it's not trance, it's not social entertainment like popular ball, it's something in between, a soft thing, and I really don't know how to explain it. So that's why I was wondering about the other people without the trance. That's why I was asking you this question.
Okay, let's talk more. Yeah, that sounds really interesting. Thanks.
Thank you so much, both for the questions and of course for Tamara's presentation. And now let's move to our final paper this afternoon from Cosima Lanzilotti, who is a psychologist and a psychotherapist, and she's doing her PhD in neuroscience in Paris. She's looking into listening efforts in multi-locutor situations, the so-called cocktail party effect. So please, Cosima.
Hello, everybody. Thanks to Filippo, Filippo and Giorgio. And I have the pre-recorded talk. I don't know if Giorgio or Filippo, you can run it.
Yes, I will try. I think Giorgio is not here now, but I have also the video somewhere. So I'll do it from here. Okay, I will see if I can do it from my laptop.
If you want, I can show you the video if you prefer. Okay,
Yeah.
now you're good.
So
Okay, thanks.
let me know if the sound is right, okay?
Good morning to all.
Yeah.
I'm Cosima Lanzilotti. I'm a PhD student in neuroscience, and I'm very happy to participate in this online symposium. Today I will present the research I carried out during my master's degree internship in Marseille in collaboration with doctors Remy Dumas, Massimo Grassi, and Daniele Schön. The interest of this research was to investigate about the effects of a prolonged exposure to highly rhythmic music on brain dynamics and perception. A very interesting phenomenon concerning the brain and the rhythm is the neural entrainment. This phenomenon explains how an external regular rhythm and the rhythm of the brain can synchronize. This can be seen, for example, when we don't know a music and we can follow it by clapping our hands or feet. For this reason, there has been a great deal of research showing how rhythm can be used, for example, in motor rehabilitation or to improve the discriminatory abilities of deaf people or those with speech difficulties. All this research has used regular rhythms of short duration. Our question was, and what about long duration regular stimulation? It should be specified that neuroscience research on this topic is scarce. Indeed, the inspiration for this research comes from studies in ethnology or anthropology, and these studies report that a regular repetitive rhythm can lead to a trance-like state. In shamanic rituals, for example, it is common to use percussive, pressing, and repetitive rhythms to induce altered state of consciousness. But what is a trance-like state? One of the definitions coming from anthropology is that trance is a transient and non-pathological modification of the state of consciousness, often accompanied by a narrowing of awareness of immediate surroundings. So we assume that a long-lasting music listening may induce a feeling of alienation, of being somewhere else. Music listening may alter to a certain extent the default level of consciousness and in turn perception and cognition. The question for us, for the neuroscientific, is how to investigate it scientifically. The suggestions come from other research on other types of altered state of consciousness like hypnosis or coma state. In fact, in such research, special measures called ERP, event-related potentials, registered with EEG electroencephalography are used. An ERP is a brain electrical responses that is generated in response to a specific stimulus, for example, light flash or tone. We can define it as a neural marker of stimulus processing. These potentials can be detected by electrodes placed on the participant's scalp, and they can be displayed graphically in the form of waves with a certain amplitude that we can see in red color and a certain latency that we can see in blue color. The amplitude can be explained as the intensity of the brain response to the presentation of the stimulus. For example, in this image, a sound presentation. and generally larger amplitudes indicate a good stimulus processing compared to decreased amplitudes. Latency is the time between stimulus presentation and brain response, and shorter latencies indicate early stage of stimulus processing more related to perception, whereas longer latencies indicate stages of processing more related to the awareness of that stimulus. Drastic reduction of the amplitude of the ERP with longer latencies are presented in clinical like coma vegetative state or non-clinical conditions of altered consciousness like hypnosis compared to health conditions. Here I would like to give you an example. There is a study with detection of a target auditory sound, and there is 2 ERP, the mismatch negativity at the top and the P300 at the bottom. And there is a comparison between pre-hypnosis state and post-hypnosis state. We can see as the amplitudes of the mismatch negativity and P300 are both decreased. The mismatch negativity, to explain the mismatch negativity, I can say that it occurs after an infrequent change in terms of pitch, loudness, or duration in a repetitive sequence of sounds. For example, there is a presentation of beep, 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 bop. When there is the presentation of the bop, there is this wave that is generated. So we could say that the mismatch negativity shows us the integrity and accuracy of the auditory system in the detection of a changement. We could almost define it as one of the neural markers of perception. The P300 is not elicited to the physical attributes of the stimulus, but to a person's reaction to it. It reflects cognitive processing of the stimulus. For example, when the individual evaluate or make a decision about this presentation, this stimulus. We could almost define it as the neural marker of cognition of attention, for example. So we now have the necessary tools to continue and to understand what our research hypotheses were. In the light of what we have said so far, we expected that a long, regular, rhythmic auditory stimulation induces an absorptive state of consciousness, leads to a decreased sensitivity to perceive a target sound, and a decreased amplitude of mismatch negativity in terms of perception, and decreased amplitude of P300 in terms of cognition in response to this target sound. For the task, the sound chosen was the sound of a triangle. This sound was presented on 5 different intensity levels, from the most audible to the inaudible level of intensity. The triangle was embedded in a piece of music that could have a regular or irregular rhythm. It should be defined that we choose a regular, very regular music, an electro music, and then we made a shuffle of the temporal structure of some part of the music in order to make to disrupt the regular temporal structure and to and to make it very irregular. At the same time, we proposed this regular and irregular version of the same music in a short or long duration, or intermittent or continuous. Participants had to detect the target sound, the triangle, pushing on a button. So each time the participant heard the triangle sound, had to pushing on a button. Participants performed the task while their brain activity was recorded through an EEG technique in order to measure earpiece. Here there is the graph that's showing us the behavioral results. In this graph we see the different levels of presentation of the triangle in the abscissa, from the most audible on the left to the inaudible on the right, and in the ordinate we can see the response accuracy index. The results showed as participants were very accurate at high intensity levels, while their performance was very poor at low intensity levels. In black line we can see the intermittent duration, the short duration, and in gray line we can see the continuous or long duration. We can observe a significantly reduced sensitivity during the continuous condition compared to the intermittent condition, that is significantly different only at intensity levels of plus 6 decibel and for plus 2 decibels. There is also reduced sensitivity in continuous regular condition compared to continuous irregular condition. Concerning the mismatch negativity results, we can see on the right the difference between the regular and irregular music for the continuous duration, for the long duration. We can see as the amplitude is reduced more reduced in the regular condition in gray line compared to irregular condition in black line. Compared to concerning the P300 results, we can see that there is a decreased amplitude for the regular condition in continuous version, long version, compared to irregular condition. Here in this slide we can observe the intertrial coherence. To explain in a very brief way, this type of analysis identifies the main frequency peaks in the structure of a stimulus. In this case, there is on the left the comparison between the regular stimulus and irregular stimulus, and we can see that in the regular stimulus there are some main peak frequencies that came up compared to the irregular stimulus, in which there are not main frequencies because I remember the temporal structure was disrupted. On the right we can see the brain responses that are very important on the two frequencies in continuous regular condition that correspond to two main frequencies of the stimulus regular condition. From the graph we see how the brain response is synchronized to the peaks in the regular music track, This is most noticeable in the regular condition of long duration. The brain stimulus coupling is the strongest in the regular continuous condition, and there is not significant synchronization in irregular condition. Here there is the connectivity analysis. The connectivity analysis shows us how different brain regions communicate with each other, and we can say that when normally in a health brain is important to have a connectivity between different brain regions. The problems arrive when this connectivity is stronger and longer. For example, in some epileptic seizure, there are in presence of a loss of consciousness, there is an hypersynchronization of different brain regions for longer time. Here we see in the regular continuous condition a stronger connectivity in the alpha band, and this effect was significant between two brain regions that are frontal and central regions. To summarize what we observe that a long continuous duration of irregular music induces a decrease of sensitivity of the auditory system to detect a target sound. This effect is not simply an habituation effect because it is modulated by the temporal rhythmic structure of the musical stimulus, confirmed by the decrease of the mismatch negativity and P300 and the index of sensitivity that are all decreased in regular continuous condition. How can we explain it? We can explain it with a high level of synchronization of the neuronal system to the temporal structure of the auditory stimulus, and with an increased functional connectivity between brain regions. The take-home messages are that the temporal structure of a stimulus that is typically a rhythmically regular and of long duration can influence an individual's ability to perceive and to detect the immediate surroundings, in this case represented by a target sound. These effects can be modulated by higher brain stimulus coupling and by a strong connectivity between distinct brain regions. From literature, we know that in some types of epilepsy, in presence of a stronger and longer connectivity between brain areas, there will be a loss of consciousness, and we know also that loss of consciousness are presented in some musical rituals where highly rhythmic auditory stimulation is proposed, and in which we know that highly rhythmic auditory stimulation can be modulated by an hyper-synchronization of brain distinct areas. So there is this interesting parallelism between epilepsy and loss of consciousness in epilepsy and loss of consciousness in such some musical rituals. The neuroscientific study of music inducing the modified state of consciousness is in its infancy, and I think that it is important to continue in this direction because it can enrich the study towards understand the brain and its functioning. I thank you for your attention. If you have any question or for further information, you can contact me at Cosima@gmail.com. And if you want to read the article, you can search. You can looking for on Google Scholar with this title: Prolonged exposure to higher rhythmic music affects brain dynamics and perception. Thanks to everybody. Ciao, ciao.
Thank you. Such a interesting work. Fantastic, really. And we need to understand. There's so much that we don't know. It's just amazing, you know, how this science is really in its infancy, as Cosima said. So the floor is open. The virtual floor is open for questions. And I guess, Filippo, we go directly after that into the discussion, right?
Yes, I think that the open session will merge with the final part of this session, because it's yes, it's 7 to 6, so no problem. Maybe I can ask a question since I have the mic on.
Yes.
Thank you. Yes, thank you very much, Mina. It's a real challenge to present neuroscientific research to anthropologists and ethnomusicologists who don't like too much to see graphs, but I mean, it's so thank you very much for your effort. And actually, when we prepared the program, was of course a challenge. I mean, one of, as I said this morning, one of the challenges of this symposium and of the HELP project is to bring together these different perspectives and to listen to Tamara and Mina and Cosima paper one after the other. Of course, it's really challenging from cognitive point of view. So no, but it's a comment that I want to tell you, Mina. Maybe you know. Okay, first of all, I have the impression that we are really we are really learning so many new things about trance states in recent times, and especially from ethnomusicologists that still work on this very classic topic of trance, very intriguing one. And so we are really improving our knowledge, I believe, on this. And also because of some research that was cited by Tamara, for instance, Rainer Pollack's work on non-isochronous rhythms. And so it's a very different research, but that brings some new possibilities for understanding trance. And Cosima, maybe you know that there are some ethnomusicologists like Judith Baker that I don't know if you've heard of her. She tries to bring neuroscientists on her field in order to try to find some neuronal substrate of trance states. And we are really used to see this kind of research in terms of very basic physiological parameters like heart rate and skin transpiration. You know, this we always see this kind of presentation of this kind of measures actually. And I think that what is really new for me in your research and your colleagues' approach is that you are using a totally different paradigm. I mean, you're not trying to look at how the heart is beating during trance state or how skin is the induction of skin conductivity is changing, but you're really trying to build up a sophisticated experimental paradigm that it doesn't have directly nothing to do with the trance ritual in the moment, but can bring some very new new ideas on how to do experiments on these altered states of consciousness. So is this really original, or that you are the only one doing this, or there are other researchers that are trying to really think about smart experimental paradigms to, let's say, go around the main question of what is trance state and trying to really take one small question and try to respond to it.
Yes, thank you for the compliments. And for us, for me and Daniele, my supervisor of master degree internship, was a very challenge, in the sense that there are not a lot of researches about this topic. For example, to publish the article, we spent 4 years, because for the neuroscience is a topic a little bit esoteric, I can say. So there is a real difficulty for us to work and in this domain, because in neuroscience it's important to have variables and verified, to have some conditions controlled, and in this kind of topic is not so simply to control the state of consciousness. Already I wonder what is a state, an altered state of consciousness. So there are a lot of questions, and here I don't present another part of the research, because our hypothesis were the rhythmic aspect and individual susceptibility to enter in a state, in altered state of consciousness. So we used some hypnosis group session to evaluate the individual level of susceptibility. And so all this to say that that is difficult, but it's a very interesting domain, I think, to explore.
Thank you.
Yeah, any other questions before I hand over to Filippo?
Can I have a question, please?
Also Bernd, Bernd, I'm not sure if he asked first or not, but okay, since you are already speaking, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, this is very interesting field of research. Maybe I didn't get it, so I'm sorry if I'm repeating this, but what was the setting actually? How did you perform this experiment? Was it in a lab and like a white room? And it would be for me very interesting to know, for us probably, to hear what was the sound, the regular music that they were hearing, and how was it compared to the stimulus that was breaking into the the music. And for example, also a control, was there any control, like how does brain behave if there is no stimulus? Or for example, I think in this new age, if I can call it, there is this another way of inducing some kind of trance state is with white noise. So for example, white noise is another stimulus, so you cannot compare it to silence, of course, because it doesn't compare. So maybe non-rhythmic and rhythmic, so white noise, does this really make any difference? This is just my question. Thank you.
Thank you. To answer to the first question, we were in a lab, so in an isolated room. And the track that we choose was an electro music that you can listen on YouTube. The name is The Dark Side of My Room by Extra Wealth. Then in the paper, in the article, if you find on Google Scholar, you can find the article, and there were all the details that I don't specify in this now for to avoid to overwhelm your brains. So for the regular rhythm, we used the same. We used the track, this electro track, and then we divided the track into some windows, and then we shuffled the windows in a sort to disrupt the temporal structure of the music. I don't know if I answered your questions.
Yes, I think it's okay. And I would, if you could please maybe just write the title in the chat of.
Yes, of course.
Okay, so Bernd now, and had a question.
Yeah, thanks. It's not so much a question than a comment or suggestion, because you said that research is scarce on these topics. Well, it may be on certain ways of listening to music, but there's a lot of research and EEG studies in neuroscience on meditation states. So I remember that there was in Vienna, there was a psychologist called Giselher Gutmann who did studies like this in the 1980s, but they're only published in German and not easily accessible, I think. But this has been done and by many people, and there are more recent studies from in the US, for example, by Judson Brewer, who did quite impressive fMRI and EEG studies of meditation states. And this is sometimes combined with auditory experiences. So I really kind of wonder that you said that there's so little research. I mean, if you focus on meditation and then on the papers on meditation and EEG studies on meditation, see if people use sound for meditation, which many of them do, then maybe you find actually a lot of studies in EEG and fMRI and neuroscience studies on states of consciousness, I think.
Okay. Yes, I refer to really to the specific topic of regular rhythm for a long duration, because in literature there are a lot of works that were made on rhythm regular but of short duration. And there are a lot of Daniele, Schön, my supervisor, work a lot about this topic. So there are a great literature about this. But thanks for your suggestion.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? If not, then thank you so much again for your presentation, for all three speakers, and for the audience and the wonderful questions. And I hand over the floor to Filippo.
Yes, thank you very much, Salva, for chairing this session. Session was really great, and thanks to all the presenters.